after f4, d5, knight f3, g6. So the white player is playing the bird opening. In this video, we're just going to go through the things we haven't gone through in the previous one, so we can close the saga already. e3 and g3 we're going to look at. So e3, we started looking at this, and we know we played bishop g7, bishop e2, c5. These are all the main moves. Castle, knight f6. It's a fairly passive opening by white. The idea of the white player is to simply put a pawn in f4 to control e5. And obviously also to go out of theory, so like you're not very well prepared on what to do against it, but at the same time white punishes himself by playing something that is not very good. Since now the black player has more pawns in the center than white has, we know the ideas here. White wants to push the pawn, wants to play f5, wants to have a rook on an open file. So let's see what happens now. Now we need to go through d3. We haven't gone through d3 at all. And d4. So after d4, this is some sort of attempt of the white player of going into a stone wall. But anyway, black castles after d4. We talked a lot about what to do in this scenario here. The white player just doesn't have any good moves at this point after the castling. We went through, b3, c3, and you know exactly how to deal with this. This c3 stone wall isn't really effective at all. You'll see it in that video. In this video, let's go through pawn takes in c5. This move has to be seen because it's fairly popular. The white player just tries to win a pawn here. And now you play knight d7 and you're attacking the pawn. And it looks like one of those positions that, usually this pawn in c5 is the type of pawn you can take by doing check and taking back the pawn. So the white player gives up the central pawn for the side pawn for no good reason. In this case, though, the white player is already castled, and it looks like this pawn might be defended with b4. However, you will just play knight e4 now, and obviously there's a threat on the square, there's a threat on the rook, and you can't block it with the bishop because he will take the bishop, the knight, he will take the knight, so you have to play c3, the only way to save material. Or you might argue, okay, knight to d4 puts the knight in between. Let's say if white plays c3 to stop that and then quickly develops, you can play a5 and you are dismantling this pawn chain. So this cannot be stopped with a3 because you will just take the pawn in b4. The pawn in a and the pawn in c are both pinned. So if you take here, the pawn can't take back because the rook falls, the c can't take back because the rook falls. So this cannot be defended by a pawn. So what to do? This cannot be defended by a bishop either, because then the bishop will be taking the bishop. So what if queen to a4, protecting this pawn, and obviously we can't take the pawn here now. Well, you will just do this, bishop takes, and now you're threatening to take the rook and win material. So after the knight takes and knight takes back, you're attacking the bishop and the queen. So queen to c2, moving away, you protect the knight like this, and then this pawn will ultimately fall. So as you can tell, there's no good way to defend that pawn. Now you may try, what about queen to b3 to defend that pawn, meaning that now the white player will have two attackers over the square c3 and also more protection over b4. Okay, well in that case you will take the pawn in b and we will have ultimate, and then we will ultimate the pressure over c3. Again, the pawn in c3 is pinned, so after queen takes in b4, now knight takes c5 is possible. We also have a threat of rook a4, getting the queen away from there so we can ultimate the attack on the pawn in b2. And now, again, the pawn is pinned, so bishop b2 isn't really a good move. You see, rook a4 now attacks the queen. The only square to go will be queen to b5 from there, the queen is safe from the rook, but then bishop to d7 traps the queen. So obviously that move fails. So in this position, what if white plays here, instead of bishop b2, what if white plays a4? The idea is obviously to stop the arrival of the rook and maybe develop the knight from this square. Okay, queen c7 comes, and now is bishop b2 finally possible? So the white player can finally play the move knight to d2 and get rid of this unbelievable knight, even though you can take back with the knight anyway. Black plays bishop to f5, and after knight to d2, that move doesn't work to remove our fantastic knight. You can see now why f4 being played prematurely is stupid. So knight takes back, and now bishop to d3 is a monster bishop. Besides, we're threatening, in case our opponent takes us, then we can take back with the knight, makes a fork on the queen and bishop. You see, for example, here, wherever the queen moves. So wherever the queen moves now, let's say queen b3, whatever, the most accurate move in this position is actually queen to c5. Attacking this pawn and going for a winning attack, also threatening the knight. And, you know, this cannot be stopped. Let's say, well, rook can't really go to that square, to e1, gets taken. Rook f3 tries to protect the pawn maybe, but then you can just take the bishop. And when you get taken back, you're simplifying here. You got double attack over c3. Queen c3 is the best way to go. And now queen can't move away because then you will win the rook. So obviously after take, you go fork. The rook will have to play to a2 in order to save material. Black is up 2 pawns. And the best move now will be b5, exploiting the pin. And we're producing a passed pawn no matter what. So let's take this from the start. f4, d5, knight f3, g6, e3. Okay, bishop g7, bishop e2, c5, castle, knight f6. And we're looking at the d4 variation. Okay, castle and pawn takes in c5. Now knight c5. So okay, so earlier we said that, you know, the knight's attacking c5, so b4 doesn't work. Because we play knight e4, we call it releasing an attack on this rook. What if white plays knight to e5? Now basically there's no difference here at all. See, because here now you play a5 anyway. Now the pawn in a will still be pinned. That has to be said. But what if white now plays c3 and says, you know what, the knight in d4 is holding the diagonal together. I should be make it and win a pawn. Okay, so after c3 by white, black plays e5, getting rid of that knight. Okay, pawn takes, bishop takes. Looks like we haven't achieved anything. It looks like now white can play bishop b2. Obviously, knight to d2 would be a mistake because you're attacking c3. So bishop to b2 is met with queen to g5, already attacking this pawn in e3. Okay, well, let's see. Queen to d3, protecting e3 and developing the queen. This is now met with bishop h2 attacking the king. Check, king moves. And now knight to e5 attacks the queen. If queen moves away, I mean, obviously there's no counterattack. Knight to f3, if white says, you know what, take my queen, I'll take yours, then you can just make a check. And then you will take the opponent queen, so that's stupid. So after knight e5, the queen moves to c2. You can play queen e6 check, king moves. And obviously now the king is on the same diagonal as this pawn. So you can take the pawn, check, king moves, check again, king moves, and then knight to g3. So you're threatening to infiltrate. Although it doesn't look like there is anything. Best move by white according to the engine. Now obviously you can't go to f3. So here you got the infiltration of the queen. You got checkmate to follow very soon. The king can move, yeah, but you know, you got another check here. King takes the knight, but then queen to h2, you know, so that's gonna be game over. Obviously there's no way now to, you know, the white's best move according to the engine would be knight b to d2, developing, but still you just play check, king moves, leads to a checkmate. So knight e2, and now the bishop is no longer defending this square, so you're going with the knight to g4. You should be winning this game shortly. White now is left with the only idea of trying to, you know, sacrifice as much material as possible to survive, but that's just not a thing. And even in this position, even if, let's say, our opponent after the check didn't go with the king, didn't move the king, but rather blocked with the rook, same thing. You basically take this bishop with check, knight takes back, and now the queen, the rook is still pinned. The most accurate way to continue is bishop to f5, attacking the queen, queen to d1, getting the queen away from that diagonal so we can place the knight in d3, attacking the rook. And when more defense is given to the rook, you still can take this knight, this bishop. Although the best move is obviously knight takes the rook, winning the exchange, because you not only win the exchange, but you know, after queen takes back, you can take this one, completely winning endgame. This takes us now from the start. f4, d5, knight f3, g6, e3, bishop g4, bishop e2, c5, castle, knight f6. And after d4, castle. Okay, so pawn takes, now knight to d7. Let's not try to defend this pawn anymore. Let's play knight to c3, normal developing move. Let's see what happens now. Knight takes back, queen to d4. These are all best moves. There is no particular, good good discover attacks on the queen. Couldn't you move the knight? Because there's an attack on this knight. And you don't want to play this type of move. It's a hoop move and it doesn't do anything. The knight is sitting fine in f6. The best move now is b6, defending the knight. Okay, rook to d1, bishop to b7. This is how you want to play this. Knight to e5, the usual move. And now e6. b3 to develop this bishop because, by playing e3 and f4, our opponent has committed this bishop to be rubbish. So, knight f to d7 does come now. The knight is pinned. Bishop to b2. And now knight takes. Because white doesn't have a knight in d2 from where the knight is able to go to f3 and protect this knight in f3, the knight is in c3, so you're just going to take in e5. Because this knight, the white player now is forced to take back with the pawn, and he kind of gives up on this lovely square for the knight. Now black plays knight to d7 and finalizes the attack on this pawn. And it's completely game over at this point. And there's no coming back. Position is much, much better for black. So when we look now, let's look at this other move. Knight f3, g6. And we're still looking at e3 variation, right? Bishop g7, bishop e2, c5, castle, knight f6. Let's look at this move, d3. This is extremely passive, but it's one of those positions where you don't really know how to take advantage of that, and your opponent is waiting for you to play a compromising move by launching the pawns a little bit too much and then take a better control of the center. So let's play castle, knight to d2, knight to c6. You just keep developing, don't compromise your position. Knight to e5, take it immediately. Pawn takes back. So the knight in c6, make sure the knight in e5 gets taken before white has the chance to protect it with another knight. Okay, knight to d7, and now there's more attack over this pawn. Okay, d4. Right, take. Now you can argue, okay, white has a good center. Not really. You see how quickly it falls apart because now you play queen to b6. There's an attack on this one, but it's also pinned, so c3 doesn't work. You can take this for free. In e5, the pawn in d4 is pinned. So white will have to play knight f3 to give more protection over that square. Still, knight e5 comes. And now you're threatening to take the knight. You're threatening that then there's going to be double attack here. So let's look at this move. King to h1. Okay, knight to c4 comes. b3, attacking the knight and developing the bishop. It looks weird. Why did we play this move? This knight c4 move. Because now we can play knight d6 and the knight will have e4 forever. This square cannot be attacked by any pawns. Bishop to g5, best move. Knight to e4 comes, ignoring the pawn here. Because you see, if this pawn really gets taken, rook to e8 wins the game. The bishop moves away, but then knight to c3. Double attack on this bishop. And this attack on the queen, so the white player loses material. If instead of bishop c5 with a counter attack on our queen, we take. Pawn takes, queen takes. Obviously, it is rook to b1, saving the rook from the attack of the bishop. Rook e3 is the best move. The idea is to play bishop f5, doubling the attack on this pawn, and then the rook to e8, doubling the attack on the bishop. And we have the bishop pair, an extra pawn. Much better position. If white plays c4, for instance, okay, bishop f5 traps the rook. Well, okay, no, the rook can move, but then you can attack it again with the bishop to b2. This takes us now to the last recap. Knight f3, g6, and then g3. So the white player here is just developing the bishop from g2. It looks like a better move to play, better diagonal to be instead of a bishop e2 move. So you play knight f6, bishop g2, bishop g7. So that's how you play it. You play the fianchetto against another fianchetto. However, you have a pawn in f7, white has a pawn in f4. And it's actually aggressive, and there's nothing particularly wrong there's nothing particularly wrong with any opening or defense, except those little things that are slightly wrong will cost you the game if your opponent plays perfectly. So castle, c5, so very similar scenario. Now we're going to look at two moves, d3 and b3. Let's start with b3. Putting both bishops on the fianchetto. Okay, b3 loses to knight e4. I mean, doesn't really lose the game, but knight e4 now immediately makes a threat on this rook. So, knight to c3 simply means that you're going to lose a pawn. There's no reason for that, because you got double attack here. The best way to take is obviously with the knight, preserving the bishop pair. Pawn takes back, bishop takes with an attack on the rook. Rook back to b1 and now castle. And it's just a free pawn. There's no compensation. There's absolutely nothing. You're just going to withdraw the bishop back to the fianchetto. So here, what if white plays c3, defending? Okay, knight to c6. Bishop to b2. Castle. d3 attacking the knight, asking a question to the knight. What do you want to do? Okay, well, knight to d6. Remember, there's an empty square in e3. That means knight f5, knight e3 will be fantastic. e4 could happen. So let's look at this for a second. Let's say if white plays knight to d2, the best move is knight to f5. And we're infiltrating in that square no matter what. Even if white pushes e4, but then we go into e3. And the funny thing is, nothing really stops us from, doing damage there. Even if white plays rook f2, saving the rook first of all, and then moving the queen. So knight e3, but now queen to c1. It looks like, your fork isn't really winning material, but the knight is fantastically placed there, and you're going to play rook e8 now. And the idea of playing e5, opening everything up, the rook becomes really strong. d4 maybe seems to be challenging that idea, but then take back, bishop to f5. Okay, what about knight h4? Attacking this bishop seems to be removing this bishop from this really good square. Okay, knight to d4 comes now. And it's good because the knight is no longer in f3 defending the square, so if bishop takes, we can take back with an attack on the rook. This knight is still protecting f5, so it doesn't matter. So that's just a blunder. Not to mention that the position of the white player is absolutely horrible. So let's look in this position after knight d6. We mentioned knight b2 is wrong. What if white plays knight to a3? Developing the knight like that and maybe going to c2 and putting more defense over e3. Okay, b5 comes now. The knight is defending that square, so you don't have to worry. Queen to d2, rook to b8. Defending the square further so that we can freely move the knight without worrying. Rook a to b1. Looks like this is now going to be a normal game, but remember, black has got more control of the center than white has, and that's not supposed to be the case. Queen to b6, threatening. Well, it's not really a particularly threatening attack, but there's a discover check available. White's best move is knight to c2, indicating that the computer doesn't worry about this discover attack. Rook to d8, queen e3. These are all best moves, and now there's a lot of pressure over e7. And you don't want to play e6, because then this bishop becomes locked. So c4 comes now, pinning the queen. You might argue, okay, what if the queen hadn't picked that square? But what else is there to do? e4 can't happen, you're attacking it twice. Knight e5 can't happen, you're attacking it twice. Do you see why it's good? It's important to take the center. If you don't take the center, your opponent is always going to attack a square more than you are, because they're going to have more pieces attacking that. So that's why you need to take control of the center straight away. So in this position, c4. The queen is now pinned. It will have, there has to be an exchange. d4 is wrong because bishop f5 comes, and now you're skewering this knight and the rook. Well, no, you're pinning the knight to the rook, and you can't really play queen d2 to protect it because d4 is too strong. This pawn cannot be taken because c3. If you take with the queen, the position is evaluated minus 360 or something at this point. You just play rook a to c8. And when the knight goes to d4, there's a discard attack on the queen moves, then you got double attack on the knight in c2. It's a disaster. If instead our opponent takes with the bishop in c3, you play knight to e4, double attack on there's an attack on the queen, an attack on the bishop. So the queen will have to move whilst protecting the bishop. But it doesn't work because you take the bishop, queen takes back, and now the rook goes to c8. And it looks like our opponent might play queen d2 and get out of that, because we're threatening knight takes pawn in d4, but here you take this one. Queen takes back, knight to d4 now. There's an attack on the, there's a threat of discover attack is too strong. The queen will have to move away, but there's no coming back now. So in this position, after c4, you can argue your opponent can just stop all of the problems. We said that d4, you play bishop f5 with the threat on the knight. What if white plays rook to c1 and doesn't have to worry about the pin anymore, maybe plays knight b4 next? Crazy enough, we give the bishop for the knight, because after the rook takes back, there's an advantage now. We're going to play b4. The idea is to play knight f5. So let's make an example. It's white to move, so what to do? If white takes this pawn, then knight to b4. The knight comes, it's just too strong. Besides, then there's an attack on this pawn as well, and the rook. So back in this position, what if white takes us in c4? Okay, knight takes back in c4. That's actually the best way to continue. You're attacking the queen. You're also threatening this bishop. So when the queen moves, let's say queen f2, b3. Finalizing the attack on that rook, threatening to produce a passed pawn. So this will have to be taken. And now queen to b3, double attack on the rook and the bishop. This can only be stopped with e3, so that the queen is putting more defense. And the queen is also defending the rook, which is very important. But still, remember, we have the rook as well defending us. So we're winning material. Although the most accurate move to continue, because you see knight b2 is, white can pin the knight, so it's not going to really help us that much. So let's play another move. The most accurate move here is knight to e3. Double, there's more attack over the rook. And if the queen takes, you can win, a lot of material. You take the rook. So what if rook moves? Rook to d2. It's such a tragic position for our opponent. Knight takes in f1. That is the most accurate move. And in this position, after the move c4, what if white says, I'm not having any of that. Just swap queens. Rook takes back. And now rook f to e1. Bishop develops in e6. Always a weird move to play, but the most accurate because you don't want to lock the bishop inside by playing e6. And you don't have to worry about knight to g5, the usual attack, trying to threatening to take our bishop, because then you will just play rook to a6, ignoring that bishop. You don't care about this pawn taking back, because this isn't really our best bishop, and there's too many pawns on the board. So rook to a3, rook to a6 is the best move. And we will be winning material unless our opponent defends that pawn. But now the thematic b4. Now we have double attack on c3. So if they take us, obviously you got a free bishop. If they take us with the knight, remember the knight is pinned. So the pawn is pinned, so knight wins a piece. So that's not possible. b4 is too strong here. So the rook can't afford to play that move. So in this position, what if white just says, you know what, I'm going to push this pawn to a3. But then, the problem is you can take the pawn in b3. So white says, I'll take this first. Black takes back. And now a3. It looks like white isn't going to lose anything. Okay, too late, because now you play bishop f5. You're pinning this pawn, meaning you're going to take, win material. Obviously, this seems to be potentially defended. See, for example, e4. Counter-attack. White has loads of attackers over this square, so it looks completely fine. But actually the best move is pawn takes here in d3. And you're attacking a piece. So after they take your piece and you take their piece, there's an attack on the rook. Rook moves. Knight c4, attacking the bishop. Rook takes c2, protecting the bishop. Knight takes bishop. Rook takes. Bishop c3 wins for black. So you see all the threats that there are. We were mentioning how knight g5, rook a6. And now all the threats, you can take, white can take. And now instead of a3, what if white simply says, let's take this bishop, this annoying bishop. Okay, take back. And now a3 is possible. And it looks like finally this is a variation where white doesn't lose anything, but black is still better. This is the most solid and the best that white will ever get. However, knight to a5 comes now. And we have crucial control over this, central, over b3. And we're just going to pile up the attack on the b file, and we should be good to go here. The very last recap, and then we close this saga. Knight f3, g6, and now g3. So knight f6, bishop, castle, c5. Very similar ideas, right? And now let's look at d3 to allow development of the bishop from this diagonal. Although I don't know how that's going to work. Knight c6. Now let's look at two ideas. Knight c3 or c4. c4 is there to attack the d pawn with the c pawn, which seems to be making perfect sense to me. But you take. And after pawn takes back, bishop to f5 is the best way to continue. Obviously, you don't want to allow your opponent to take here and take your right to castle away. Besides, if queen takes, it would be a great excuse to develop the rook. Knight c3 now, best by white. Knight to e4. Double the attack on c3. Okay, knight takes, bishop takes. And now a move like queen a4 is met with castling, so you don't have to worry about the pin and maybe knight e5 coming and so on. The idea here would be knight e5, putting more attack here, but it's just not going to work. Also, it releases an attack on the bishop, so after take, and then there's like the idea of to take here and doubling your pawn structure, but that's not a problem. So queen a4, you castle. If queen to b3, let's look at this idea. This seems to be more effective because it's attacking something, that pawn, but you castle, you ignore it. You see, the queen can't really go now and take the pawn in b7 because rook b8, queen is forced to go to a6. We got double attack on the pawn in b2, even though our best move is knight to b4. Now the queen will have to move. Let's say queen takes pawn or whatever. Even if the queen had gone to a4, the best move is knight to c2, attacking the rook. Rook moves. Knight to d4. Now we're attacking e2 as well. There is no Zwischenzug here. Knight take knight, for example, you just take back. See, for example, knight takes, bishop takes, comes with check. Now you can argue, okay, e3 comes with a, an attack on the bishop. But you missed the part where rook a8 traps the queen. So in this position, instead of knight takes knight, what if white goes back with the rook and says, I'll give you this pawn, but at least we keep playing this game. And he wants to keep equal chances. Not to mention that this is a passed pawn and white still has extra material. Here the best move is surprisingly, well, it's not surprising because now you know exactly what we're threatening. Knight takes in f3, check. Pawn takes back, and after bishop check and rook a8, this queen remains trapped. So even, yeah, there could be some compensation in material, but you're completely winning the endgame. So let's assume our opponent will see all of that and not play queen to b7 here. Okay, bishop to e3, develop, and attack this pawn further. Knight to a5 attacks the queen. Queen to b5, b6. Everything is safely protected. Rook a to d1, attacking the queen. Queen to c8. Knight to g5, attacking this bishop and, putting double attack on that bishop, but you just take. So that's not a good move. h6, the knight will have to move again. Knight f3, queen to e6 is the best move. Attacks this bishop. And also threatens to win this crucial pawn. Besides, the position of our opponent is falling apart. What if our opponent says, you know what, I'll do this. Bishop takes c5, and when you take back, I'll take your knight. Seems to be making sense. But now you just take knight to c4. And now the funny thing is, queen can't take, obviously. Bishop can't just move away. Well, okay, first of all, if the bishop goes this diagonal, you go knight e3 threat. But if bishop, let's say, goes away, bishop to f2 or something. Black wins a crucial pawn in b2 with an attack on the rook. And now we have a majority on the queen side. We're going to start pushing. This is white, playing the best moves available, and still position is evaluated -2. So you can tell that that's a faulty variation. So in this position, what if instead of bishop f2, the bishop just goes to d4 and says, you know what, I don't want the knight to go here, I want to trade your dark square fianchetto bishop, and if you take me, I can take with the knight, protect this pawn, attack the queen, and be annoying. Obviously, you missed the part when black plays a6 and traps the queen. No, I'm kidding, the queen is not trapped. Queen to b3, to put more protection of the third rank, still doesn't work because bishop takes. And knight e3 is going to happen anyway, so if knight takes, then knight e3, remember, comes with check. Now you can say, okay, well, your queen is under attack. Well, first swap queens, and then win material. So in this position, we tried c4, didn't work. What if knight to c3? Okay, d4 punishes that move immediately. The knight will have to move. Knight to e4, okay, fine. Take. Castle. e3, trying to, obviously challenge this strong center and allow the development of the bishop and so on. Queen to b6, reinforcing it. Take. Okay, so let's see how to continue now. King h1, getting out of that diagonal. Rook to d8. We need to getting the queen away from the attack of the rook. It's not like the rook was attacking straight away, of course, but you gotta develop somehow. And the bishop can't develop, this bishop. If you play b3, there's d3 attacking the queen and also releasing an attack on this rook. So the bishop will have to play, let's say, bishop to d2. However, it's black to move, so bishop e6 is the best move by black. If the bishop now goes to d2 for real, then you can take the pawn in b2. It's not a poison pawn. Now you can argue that white can play rook b1 and then go to b7, and it looks really good for white. But now you take this pawn and then you take another pawn, and there's no enough compensation, because then the a pawn would be a strong pawn for the black player. So in this position, instead of bishop d2, what if white plays f5? He's probably wondering about this move, because after take takes a thematic sacrifice, at least now our opponent will have an attack, especially because the rook will open up. So bishop to d7 is the best move, and after pawn takes, take back with the h pawn, knight to g5, releasing potential queen f3, the rook to f7, the knight to f7. This is the usual plan that white plays. But now knight e5 should save everything. This cannot be challenged with bishop to f4, for example, removing this strong knight. The idea of going to f7 with the knight, piling up the attack, queen f3 maybe, because that allows us to play bishop to b5, position evaluated -3. Everything is fine.